I was confronted by the stark reality that after 9/11, the NSA, in the deepest of secrecy, with the approval of the White House, engaged in a mass surveillance program. You realize that your own government has set aside the Constitution. It's set aside rule of law. It's operating under emergency conditions. And so the United States, in secret, was turned into a surveillance state on a vast scale, sweeping up just huge amounts of data. I wasn't going to remain silent. I guess I just wasn't going to remain silent.
Well, basically, it came in I would say, a slow pace building up through the 1990s into the late 90s. Contractors and businesses were having too much influence as to what was happening inside NSA. They were determining the outcomes and determining the processes, as opposed to anyone who knew anything inside the agency. So it was like outsourcing, is what they called it. And then when they rejected the solutions that would work and were working for outsourced contracts to build from scratch, which ultimately failed. Because they are not in the business that we are internally. So that was a slow progression that over time that said basically the forces of evil inside were too numerous to win. Okay, it was too numerous to beat. All right, so ultimately that was one of the reasons I was planning on leaving anyway in 2002.
I also had dirty knowledge about 9/11 intelligence, critical intelligence that they knew about had not been properly shared, intelligence they didn't know about, had not discovered, and then massive multi-billion-dollar fraud, waste, and abuse. Many, many dollars being spent, billions and billions of dollars being spent, ostensibly to solve the problem, of big data. And I'm confronted by that. I'm staring deep into that Pandora's box, right? And the abyss is staring back at me. And so I knew that if I remained silent, that I would be complicit in a crime. I knew if I remained silent, I'd be an accessory to the government violating the Constitution.
But when 9/11 happened, they took the programs that I had helped do and put together and used them to spy on everybody on the planet, including all U.S. citizens first. We were the first ones who they adopted bulk acquisition and bulk collection on. That was U.S. citizens. To me, I'd been working in the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, for almost 30 years when I was there. And so when they first started to do this bulk acquisition of data on U.S. citizens, to me it was immediately obvious that we're going down the path to becoming a KGB state and a Stasi state. So, that was obvious. Anyone who knew those kinds of societies and knew what they did would know and recognize that kind of activity as going down that path.
I confronted the lead attorney at NSA, and he told me that the White House has approved the program and it was all legal. That threw me back to the Nixon era in U.S. history, where a president resigned office because he abused instruments of national power, including the NSA. So there I was. You were talking 2001, it's a very lonely place, and where clearly the line was going to be drawn way over to the side of security, and hey, it doesn't really matter what the rights are, it doesn't matter what the law says, we're just going to do what we need to do. So this is really an ends justifies the means. It's emergency conditions, we're going to do whatever we can, and of course that power historically has always been abused.
And they justify everything they're doing by national security, when in fact it's not that at all. A lot of it is just population control and control of, for example, if you know about, this is like J. Edgar Hoover on super steroids. J. Edgar Hoover stayed as the director of FBI for almost 40 years because he had information on every senator and every House of Representatives and every president. So, and if he didn't have it, they thought he did. So, in which case, that gave him leverage over all these people who were supposed to be above him and basically writing the rules for what FBI was doing, but they didn't. He did. That's because he had all this knowledge, and that was power over people who had in positions of control of the government. And the same is true now.
I was confronted by the stark reality that after 9/11, the NSA, in the deepest of secrecy, with the approval of the White House, engaged in a mass surveillance program. You realize that your own government has set aside the Constitution. It's set aside rule of law. It's operating under emergency conditions. And so the United States, in secret,